All right, folks, should we get into the communist leaders tier list? What's your opinion on Obamaism, Bidenism? It's called neoliberalism, and it needs to die. Tier list time. Let's go, baby. It's time. Your time is up. My time is now. You can't see me. My time is now. All right. Well, they started us off pretty basic here. This website doesn't allow me to use my ad blocker, by the way, those bastards. Maybe I can zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see better. It looks kind of bad. Either way, they have like all of the obvious ones here at the beginning, or obvious if you're smart. Obviously, Karl Marx is S tier. Without him, we wouldn't have the science of Marxism, or it would have taken many more years for the science of Marxism to come about. He was a man who fully dedicated himself to being an intellectual weapon on the side of the working class. He wasn't someone who wrote to sound smart or to elevate himself in his career or to elevate himself in bourgeois academia. He was someone who wrote to be understood by the workers. And he said, theory becomes a material force once it's grasped by the workers and once they can use that theory and that understanding of the system that they are operating within in order to advance the class struggle and advance political struggle in their own interests. So basically, at the time, there was all this. I won't go too much into it because obviously I could talk about Marx forever. But at the time, there were all these utopian socialists, these people who recognized the deleterious effects that capitalism had on society and on the working class. And they were saying we need a new system, we need socialism. But they were all utopians. Right? They thought that we could bring about some magical system tomorrow that fixes all of the problems within capitalism. But what Marx understood is that modes of production don't change into other modes of production overnight. Historically, modes of production are always shifting and changing into new ones, but it happens through struggle between diametrically opposed economic classes over long periods of time. And this is exacerbated by the development of the means of production, which capitalism develops the means of production very quickly, creating the conditions for the possibility of socialism. So Marx also said, capitalism, we're against it, yes, but it has its place in history. Its role in history is to increase the productive forces so that socialism can be a possibility, to proletarianize most of society so that there's a class which diametrically opposes itself to the ruling class, whose interests are diametrically opposed. So obviously, Marx is S tier. I don't think that needs that much explanation. First time watching a tier list, LOL. Yeah, I don't watch tier lists either. I guess I've watched some MMA tier lists. The only one I've watched, I think, is Hazaldin's Communist Leaders tier list, which is a great video, by the way. But yeah, whatever. You got to do the memes sometimes. You got to do the trends. Friedrich Engels. Everything I said about Marx, ditto for Engels. The people who say that Marx was this ultra complex thinker and Engels was just this simpleton who couldn't actually understand Marx and who oversimplified Marx, that is hogwash. That is bullshit. That is Western Marxist CIA funded gobbledygook type stuff. Engels was absolutely essential to Marx. Without Marx or without Engels, there is no Marx. It was Engels who told Marx to first study political economy. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, the British political economists. It was Engels who did the first dialectical materialist analysis of the working class in England, the state of the working class in England. It was Engels who applied Marx's theory to the field of anthropology and to the field of science and chemistry and biology in a way that Marx couldn't because he was busy studying economics. And he also studied anthropology, and Engels drew from Marx's notes heavily. And Engels was always clear that Marx was a much greater man than him. That's what he would say. But I think that he sells himself short. I don't think Marx was that much of a greater thinker than Engels. I think they were a team and they played off of each other. Even if Marx was the leader, Engels was essential, not just in funding Marx and keeping him alive, but in the thinking process, the ideas. All right. Vladimir Lenin, the only person in history who understood Marx as well as Engels did. There's and get your mind out of the gutters when I give you this analogy, but the communists in Burkina Faso used to say that Marxism is the fist and Leninism is the movement of the fist that throws the punch. right? And don't make that dirty, okay? Don't be weird about it. It's a good analogy if you have your mind out of the gutters, if you're not porn-addled, okay? But Lenin was the first person to actually put Marxism into practice in a way that resulted in the dictatorship of the proletariat, a workers' state, a successful revolution that established a successful and long-lasting state that served the interests of the working masses rather than the interests of the bourgeoisie. The first one in history, the largest one in history, one that helped revolutionary movements all across the world and which saw itself as part of this global movement towards communism. Um, it's impossible to overstate how important the October Revolution was to the history of communist struggles and how much we have to learn from Vladimir Lenin. So, when it comes not only to theory, but putting that theory into practice, this man was the GOAT, and you need to read him in addition to Marx and Engels. Marx and Engels aren't enough. You need Lenin too. That's how important he is. Another person who you need, maybe not as much as Lenin, but someone who also wrote a lot of theory about putting socialism into practice. Although some people like to say Stalin never wrote any new theory. What do you mean? He was building socialism. He was writing about how to collectivize the farming system and how to develop the industry and how to make socialism actually work in practice. What is that if not theory? Right? Theory is supposed to help us understand the material, the real. So in the process of building the Soviet Union, he was also developing the theory of Marxism. Just look at the inter-party debates in the CPC, the Communist Party of China, in the early years. They were constantly looking at what Stalin did and saying, okay, this is what worked and this is what didn't. Let's take what worked and leave behind what didn't and then adjust it for our own unique material conditions. So he absolutely contributed to Marxist theory and, of course, led the world's first worker state, defeated the Nazis when every Western military analyst thought that Russia was going to get rolled over by Germany, industrialized his country faster than anyone had ever done before. It was at the time, before China, the fastest increase in life expectancy that had ever been seen in human history. A true Chad in every way, and someone who helped with the revolution itself, who would rob banks on behalf of the Bolshevik Party. Just a pure Chad. Mao Zedong. So again, they're starting us off with all the best ones. Mao, everything I said about these guys is true of Mao. Actually, everything I said about Lenin and Stalin when it comes to putting Marxism into practice, simplifying Marxism for the masses of his country, and actually adding to the theory of Marxism, especially with his book On Contradiction. My favorite work from Mao is his pamphlet on physical education, which talks about the need to work out and take care of your body. Which is where he famously says, civilize the mind and make savage the body. Which, by the way, my dad has his wrestling team saying that now, by the way. They're all saying, civilize the mind, make savage the body, and they love it. We'll see if they look up where it's actually from. All right, well, they sure threw us for a loop with this one. They went from Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao to Gonzalo. Yikes! I mean, obviously, like, the temptation, the obvious move is to put him in F tier, right? Oh, they boiled babies. The Shining Path, awful. All that stuff is true. Obviously, propaganda exaggerates the crimes of people like the Shining Path or groups like the Shining Path, but they were legitimately like trying to shoot peasants and working class people for not agreeing with their theory, right? Rather than reaching out to the people and guiding their consciousness forward, and helping them to develop over time, which is how everybody develops and learns. They were trying to force the peasants into this like ultra left Maoist political line through force, and they committed like massacres and did a bunch of horrible stuff in order to do that. And it hurt the name of socialism and communism in Peru. That being said, if you read, a random Chairman Gonzalo quote, a lot of them are based. The people who he was fighting against in Peru were really, really bad, evil, US-backed imperialist reactionaries. But also, you got to take into account the effect that he's had on the Western left. Like, so many Western leftists run around holding up Gonzalo like he's literally in the S tier, with Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. Like he's the sixth head of Marxism, and they're just ultras. So yeah, we'll put him in E. We'll leave him out of F because of the base things he said. Pavel Linowski, thank you, comrade, for the €6 super chat. Appreciate you, brother. I can't wait to go buy some schnitzels with those euros. I don't know why I said schnitzels. It's a German thing, right? Either way, Ernst Thälmann is one of my German heroes. Absolutely. Ernst Thälmann was super based. You're probably better off studying Ernst Thälmann. This is controversial, but I like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, but you're probably better off studying Thälmann. Was held in solitary confinement forever by Hitler, was brought out and executed, as a way to intimidate the German people and the German resistance. So absolutely based leader who stood up to fascism at a time of absolute crisis. All right, Khrushchev. Now, what did Khrushchev do that was good? He was not a Western capitalist imperialist. He was better than like JFK, who's probably the best American president that we've had since Lincoln. He's better than any American president, I guess, since Lincoln. That being said, when it comes to socialist leaders, he was awful. The decision to do the secret speech and fabricate all of this bullshit about Stalin because he was in a political battle with Stalin and wanted to consolidate his own power afterwards. I mean, what an opportunistic and slimy move that just fucked socialism and socialists for years to come, especially us in the West, right? Because it was hard for the West to badmouth Stalin before that. He had beaten Hitler, he had revived their economy, he had done all these amazing things. There wasn't all this anti-Stalin, anti-Soviet propaganda during World War II because we were on the same side, more or less. But then Khrushchev comes out with this secret speech and says, well, actually, Stalin's the worst dictator ever. And we know now, since the Soviet archives have been opened up, that a lot of these claims he made about Stalin, there's absolutely no evidence for. But he gave a total gift to the Western propagandists. Look, socialism is evil. Their own leaders say it's evil. Their own leaders hate each other. Khrushchev said Stalin was an evil dictator and that socialism wasn't working because he was just eating all the food and killing everybody for his own purposes. So what a disgusting move. The Chinese call this national historical nihilism. The secret speech was a big part of the Sino-Soviet split. And they've dubbed this national historical nihilism, and they consider it to be a huge mistake. Shitting on your country's history and shitting on the progress that your country has made in the past through struggle, and shitting on your country's heroes because they were flawed human beings like any human being. The Chinese absolutely reject that. And it's one of the things that we've been working to reject in America, where you have a lot of this, flag burning and America is evil, stolen land, needs to be balkanized and destroyed. This is not the Marxist-Leninist position. This is national historical nihilism. And Khrushchev was like the progenitor of that. So, E. Brezhnev. I think Brezhnev was better. I don't know that much about this era of the USSR. When was he actually in power? I know a lot more about China and other socialist experiments than I do actually about the Soviet Union outside of the revolutionary era. But I'm pretty sure this era of Soviet history, like there was a ton of damage that had already been done by Khrushchev. I think a lot of the Soviets' issues that led to the collapse were those seeds were sowed under Khrushchev, and Brezhnev was trying to recover from that. But it was a very prosperous era for the Soviet Union. People lived quite well. He had the industrialization that had already been laid by Stalin, so they didn't have to work super hard to industrialize, and they didn't have the Nazis breathing down their throats. So they were able to achieve a lot of prosperity. This was the point in the Soviet Union where people were eating more calories than Americans, but more healthy food, where everybody had like a condo and tons of vacation time. Universal daycare, universal healthcare, universal housing, all these things were achieved. So I don't have that negative of a view of him. I'm sure mistakes were made, but we'll put him in C. Brezhnev D tier. I mean, I'm sure you guys know more about him and the bad things that he did, the mistakes that he made. But wasn't he also the leader during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which was based and would have saved Afghanistan if they were successful? I don't know. S tier eyebrows. Failed to till the soil. He just needed Lysenko as an advisor. Gorb! This is not a communist. This man is not a communist. This man is ranked like second in Watch Mojo's top 10 communist leaders. He is a capitalist. He brought capitalism back to the USSR. He did a commercial inside of a Pizza Hut where he was shoving pizza down his fat face to sell consumerism and capitalism to the Soviet people before he sent millions of them into extreme poverty and caused over 1 million people to die because all their socialist protections went away and they were faced with the rugged realities of capitalism, which was instituted on them through force and through Western interventionism and Western pillaging of Russian resources. This is the guy who auctioned off Russia's state-owned enterprises for pennies. Russia's nationalized, worker-owned enterprises were auctioned off for pennies to American shareholders. That is not communism. That's not socialism. That is capitalism. And Gorbachev is a capitalist and a traitor to his own country. And that's why he had like an 11% approval rating when he left. Yes, agree with everybody in the chat going off about Gorb right now. Yuri Andropov. Let me look up Andropov just to get refresh my brain on who he was. He was the general secretary in the USSR, was the chairman of the KGB. I know he's like a famous figure, but I don't know that much about him. Wasn't he the one before Gorb? We'll skip Andropov. I don't know enough. Konstantin Chernenko. I don't know much about him either. I'm showing my ignorance right now. Another general secretary of the Communist Party. Oh, he must have been there before Andropov, maybe? Gotcha. Or Andropov was before him. Yeah, we'll save those leaders. Like I said, I don't know that much about that era of the Soviet Union, so no investigation, no right to speak. And actually, I know I have comrades who are very close to me who could tell you all about that era of the USSR and who know it better than me. So yeah, on another stream, maybe. Malenkov, Molotov, we'll skip these guys. Just a bunch of people who were part of the USSR. Trotsky, again. Well, I don't know if you could say the same thing that you could say about Gorbachev, that he wasn't a communist, because like he did help lead the Red Army. He did shut down the Makhnovites, the anarchist bandits who were, raiding Soviet supply lines and terrorizing the peasant population in the name of anarchism and decentralized authority and all this bullshit. Trotsky was the one who shut them down, but he was always a worm. He's often portrayed as Lenin's best friend, like in that Russian Revolution oversimplified video we debunked a while back. But in fact, Lenin thought he was always a worm. He said that Trotsky would, rather than taking a firm position on any of the major questions of Marxism, he would manage to worm his way in between both positions to try and appease everybody. He was afraid to stand on business. And in practice, he acted not even just as a liberal or anti-communist, but as a fascist. He was leading the charge, bad-mouthing the USSR in the same way that Khrushchev did with the secret speech at a time when the Nazis were trying to destroy the USSR. He was giving them propaganda gifts. When he was exiled from the USSR, he took a little stop in Italy, Benito Mussolini's Italy, and rather than being killed for being a member of the Red Army, he was welcomed and had a few meetings and just left, went on his way with no repercussions. And we've been talking about the theoretical legacy of a lot of these leaders and the way that their lives and theory and actions have affected the Western left, the American left. And there is no leader who has dicked the American left more than Leon Trotsky. Because you can be a Trotskyist and say, I'm a socialist, But every time socialism's ever been tried in practice, it's failed. I'm a socialist, but socialism doesn't work in real life, except when I try it. Now trust me to do it. Right? You can do that and still have a job in the American academy. You can still have a nice job and call yourself a communist if you're a Trotskyite and you condemn existing socialism. Socialism when it's actually put into practice in real life. So Trotsky has created this vein of academia that the CIA has exploited to no end. That allows for compatible leftism, that allows for anti-communist communism, which ultimately serves the ruling class while cloaking itself in red and a hammer and sickle. So an incredibly bad effect that Trotsky has had, and there's a reason that there is a Trotskyite to neocon pipeline. Because even though Trotsky called himself a communist and, did things with the Red Army, his positions, as we said, during World War II and after, became aligned with the fascists. So a lot of people who were former Trotskyites just ended up becoming neocons because it's not that far of a jump to say, the socialism in practice is bad and authoritarian and it's not right and not real socialism, to saying, well, then we should get militarily involved and destroy these governments and overthrow them, the way that neocons believe. And a lot of the original for Cultural Freedom people who funded a lot of the fake left and the compatible left in the American Academy, a lot of those people were either Trotskyites or former Trotskyites who became neocons. A ton of them. You would be surprised. Read Francis Stone Saunders' book, The Cultural Cold War, if you want to see more about the neocon or the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline that Jackson Hinkle got Alex Jones to talk about, which is just hilarious. I love Jackson. Anyways, we're putting him in F. You're worse than Gonzalo Trotsky. How's that feel? Spared Love, Zenobia. We don't need to talk about these people calling in. I want some people from other countries, not like, all these Russian revolutionaries. I want some more Bakunin. Or, no, not Bakunin. Bukharin. He's Russian too, but interesting figure. Actually did start out pretty good, I would say. Very interesting thinker, someone worth reading, and then someone who ended up getting purged. But he, Lacerdo talks about this in his Stalin Critique of a Black Legend. Bukharin was collaborating with anti-government forces that were plotting to overthrow the state at a time when they were under attack from the Nazis. So again, basically aligning himself with the Nazis, although he did contribute much more than Trotsky did before that, in my view. So we'll give him a D. Oh, super chat here. Thank you, Pavel. Second €6 super chat from Pavel. Appreciate you, brother. We are a completely people's-funded institute here at Midwestern Marx, and you can donate via super chat if you want me to read your question or your statement, or patreon.com/Midwestern Marx, where you'll get a bunch of perks, including exclusive content and Q&As with me and Carlos. But anyways, you know that Trotsky's books were not banned in Nazi Germany and Italy? I mean, I'm not surprised. It went right along with their narrative about communism. It's the same way he's not banned, or it's the same reason he's praised in the proto-fascist United States, because he goes right along with their pro-war, capitalist, imperialist, or even fascistic narratives. I mean, not only is he not banned here, he's pushed here by the institutions of power. So yeah, Trotskyism is very nefarious because there are Trotskyites who give very good analysis of economics and politics and history, but then they snake you at the end, at the last moment. They'll try to take the movement in a reactionary direction at the most important times when the movement needs to go in the right direction. So let's see here, Karl Radek. I don't know much about him. I've heard of him. He was Polish. Yeah, I don't know too much. Rosa Luxemburg. Now, this is an interesting one. Rosa was German. She was killed by Freikorps, who were very right-wing leaning German military personnel, many of whom ended up becoming the Nazis or SS soldiers, or many ended up joining the Nazi party or becoming SS soldiers. And there's a very interesting story because her and Karl Liebknecht, who was Engels' nephew, I believe, who was one of the leaders of the German Communist Party at the time, they were sold out by the Social Democrats. So this is such a perfect microcosm of the role that Social Democrats play historically and the reason we call them social fascists, right? It was the fascists who actually did the violence against Liebknecht and Luxemburg, but it was the Social Democrats who sold them out to the fascists. So they didn't actually commit the fascist violence. They didn't join in with the fascist gangs, but they collaborated with them in order to screw over the communists and the Marxist Leninists. Um, so great, I mean, really tragic story, but a microcosm of the role that social democracy plays on a macro scale. As far as Luxemburg's theory, the accumulation of capital is interesting. I don't know if I necessarily agree with her conclusions in that book, or her reasons for writing that book, but it's an interesting book reading about how capital accumulates. And she makes a slight critique of Marx or an analysis of Marx and how he says that capital accumulates. It's an interesting read. I don't know if she's right. I would have to go back and read it again, but obviously was a good leader. Made a lot of mistakes though. Her polemics with Lenin, I side with Lenin in all of them. She was really focused on spontaneity, rather than, over organized discipline and stuff like that. She emphasized spontaneity, and it's not like Lenin ignored spontaneity, right? He has that famous quote: "There are decades when weeks happen, and weeks where decades happen." Things are spontaneous and random, but we don't need to worry about that so much. We need to seize the opportunities when they come. But luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? You can't have spontaneity if you don't have disciplined organization day by day. If you're not ready to meet the moment, when that spontaneous revolutionary moment comes about, you won't be ready. And I think Rosa Luxemburg also agreed with this. She was obviously on the ground organizing every day. So I don't really understand what the polemics were all about. When I read them, I'm like, what the hell are you guys even arguing about here? And anyways, she ended up getting killed and Lenin ended up winning. So that's kind of harsh and crude and morbid, but that does show you who was more correct in the debates. But the debates are stupid anyways. I feel like I'm like, why are you guys even arguing? But we'll put her in B. That's a little high, but whatever. It's nice to have some famous female comrades. Karl Liebknecht. I basically just told the whole story of him. Um, they made a lot of theoretical mistakes too that led partially to the Nazi rise to power. Karl Kautsky, someone who Lenin respected at the beginning, someone who was an intelligent thinker at the start, but who had his brain broken by imperialism and opportunism and the First World War. He had this absurd theory of super imperialism. The idea that, how does super imperialism work? It's like you let imperialism go, and eventually imperialism conquers the entire world. And then it creates socialism, because then we'll have an entirely conquered, globalized economy that's centrally planned by the dominant imperialist powers. There's some gobbledygook like that. I can't remember the actual thesis. That might be slightly mangling it, but I mean, we see that now. I also believe he thought the imperialist powers would unite into one imperialist power, which would make it easier for the workers to struggle against. But I mean, we've seen that in modern day. We have the U.S. after World War II becoming the dominant imperialist hegemon. We have one country rather than various competing imperialist countries. One country, basically with Europe being their tools, basically being occupied by the U.S. financial system after the war. And did that bring us socialism? Obviously not. It's why would the American imperialist ruling class start doing socialism and helping the workers? Clearly not. But he was a Dempat sock. Yeah, basically. And Lenin just absolutely cooks Kautsky. Because Kautsky was one of the smarter people opposing Lenin at the time. Theoretically, he uses Kautsky all the time to explain his ideas, to counter Kautsky's ideas and articulate his own. And so he has books and books and books just cooking this man. But we'll put him with Khrushchev. Hoxha. Let me get these guys out of here. Hoxha was pretty based, man. There was a lot of stupid stuff going on. You know, he was like kind of ultra in his like everybody's a revisionist but me type stance. But I mean, I kind of respect that he stood on business and stood on principles. And a lot of the critiques he had at the time of China and the USSR and the existing socialist powers were legitimate. And they were critiques that, you know, the Soviet Union especially should have taken more seriously. You know, maybe they should have taken his everybody's a revisionist sort of stance more serious. Maybe everyone is a revisionist at the end of the day. We'll put Hoxha. We'll put him in A tier. Screw it. I like Hoxha. All right, let's look for some more famous ones. Dimitrov. I don't know if I'd say that's a communist leader. Is it? Am I thinking of the wrong guy? Oh, I am thinking of the wrong guy. He was the actual leader of the party in the People's Republic of Bulgaria. I didn't even know that, dude. I'm so stupid. I just always hear Carlos and Noah talk about Dimitrov's theory. I didn't even know he was like a politician and leader. I'm so stupid. I really got to learn more about East Europe and the history of the USSR. I know too much about Latin America and Asia. So I don't know much about what he did as a leader, but pretty based guy. Wholeheartedly agree with Hoxha. Based. Hoxha build bunker and not allow McDonald. He bad guy. Yeah, that's about what the criticisms of Hoxha amount to a lot of the time. He built bunkers. He built way too many bunkers. Like, well, if the U.S. would have actually invaded them, like very well could have happened during the Cold War, or if the USSR continued on and the Eastern Bloc continued on, then they would have been thanking him for building those bunkers because they would have needed them to defend themselves. So. All right, let's see here. Maxim Gorky. We'll skip him for now. We'll avoid any controversy for now. Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung goes up here. Kim Il-sung is one of the most base leaders of all time. Everything I said about these guys who put socialism into practice, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, is true of Kim Il-sung. There were entire regiments during the Korean War that the South Koreans, and the U.S. had that were tasked with hunting down Kim Il-sung because he was such a successful warrior, strategist, theorist, and organizer, educator, recruiter. He was amazing at everything. There's a reason why the Kim family, is still so revered and at the head of the party today, because of his skill and his aptitude and what he did for the country and his kids too. But especially him, because he actually fought in the Korean War and emerged as this natural leader of his people. And he developed Juche with these hyper-based principles of self-sufficiency, and not being dependent on any other country and being able to survive an imperialist blockade all on their own, which have been vital principles in defending against imperialism, which is why the DPRK is having more success than almost any other country defending themselves from imperialism today, despite the fact that they're being strangled under a blockade. All of that's rooted in Juche and Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong-il. I'd say I'd put the kids here. They were good too. They just didn't have the same context as the grandpa and father, where he was in this war fighting for his own country's liberation against first the Japanese colonizers and then the U.S., where they killed 20% of his population. Kim Yo-jong, like, she's only on here because she's famous and because everyone knows who she is. But she's not like in a position that's as powerful as the others. Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai was based as hell. Everything Zhao Enlai ever said, all his quotes are super based. He was the one who was having that conversation with Khrushchev. He's also very handsome, by the way, just saying. But he was the one who was having that conversation with Khrushchev, where Khrushchev said, the problem is that I am from the working class and you are from the managerial class or professional class or whatever, the higher classes. And Zhao Enlai said, yes. And the other thing we have in common is that we are both traitors to our class. Just completely cooked him. And it was true. That was during the Sino-Soviet split when the USSR was moving in a bad direction under Khrushchev and China was moving in a better direction. They still had mistakes and stuff, but yeah, we'll put him in A. I can't justify moving him down to B. All right. Ho Chi Minh. S. I know that Haas, I think, put Ho Chi Minh in A or B because there are so many Western leftists who claim to be Marxist Leninists but are actually just liberals who support Ho Chi Minh because Vietnam is a small country and the Vietnam War is this inspiring David versus Goliath story. So they identify with Vietnam even though they're libs and they don't support socialism when it actually has power and is actually able to crush the bourgeoisie, and they misrepresent what Ho Chi Minh stood for. The same kind of people who have Thomas Sankara with like a pride flag in their bios. Those are the kind of people who hype up Ho Chi Minh. That being said, I will not allow those people to taint my view of Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is one of the most based leaders of all time. Brilliant theorist, somebody who was greatly inspired by the Enlightenment, by France, by the United States, who read the U.S. Declaration of Independence and said, when Vietnam was fighting their war against the Japanese and French colonizers, he requested that the U.S. come help them. Because he says, in your Constitution, it says that you stand for freedom and people fighting for their freedom against colonial domination, like you did against the British. And of course, the US didn't do that. They invaded Vietnam in one of the most horrific and brutal and senseless wars of all time before getting their asses beat by a bunch of dudes with bamboo sticks running around in the woods. A bunch of based, intelligent communists running around in the woods with bamboo, I should say. But yeah, he was just a brilliant guy, and I will not allow liberal leftists to taint my view of Ho Chi Minh. And same with Stalin. He was actually building socialism in a rural, jungle sort of country. A unique conditions that are different conditions than where socialism had been built previously. Their beef with the Chinese is stupid, but that's not rooted in Ho Chi Minh. It's rooted in other stuff. And the way that they collaborate with their brothers in Laos is also super based. And Laos is a very underrated socialist project. I bet they don't have any Laotian leaders on this list here. They should have Kaison Phomvain, though. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, folks. No doubt. No doubt. Let's go, baby. We're so back. We're so back, baby. No more glasses wearers, baby. Take the glasses off. Paul Potts here. I'm not actually going to rank Paul Pot because there's I'm pretty sure Henry Kissinger in the US bombed all of the books and the records from Cambodia at the time. So we really can't know what was going on. We know that they were, real hard on the intellectual class. Is this Jay Sakai? Oh my god. Notice how they don't even have Jay Sakai's picture. Also, how is this a communist leader? He's not a leader of anything except bullshit. He's a leader of the CIA left in modern day. They don't even have his face because he never showed his face, which is like a textbook, that's something that the CIA does. They fund these writers who come out of nowhere, like Joan Peters, who wrote From Time Immemorial, the book about how Palestine was empty before the Zionists got there. There was nobody there, which has been widely debunked. She just came out of nowhere and wrote this book, and a lot of people are like, she's probably a CIA asset. Right? Jay Sakai, we don't even have his face. He never had to come out and defend his ridiculous ideas or explain them further because he's this anonymous guy. Freaking CIA invented character. He probably doesn't even exist. Settlers is an idiotic book. It tries to replace class struggle with racial struggle, which is inherently anti-Marxist, completely distorts the essence of Marxism, the very core of Marxism, and it lends itself to some of the most damaging and harmful trends on the American left. The trends of culture war obsession and hyper focus on identity politics above class. These are what are pushed by settlers. Nihilism, right? A belief that we can't have revolution in America because our country's just too evil. Even though Marx said that revolution would be global and the proletariat of every country, including America, needs to fight back against its ruling class. Even though Marx said that America's too evil, he didn't understand how evil and morally wrong America was. Our proletariat is a bunch of mean racists, and we should actually have racial warfare. Indigenous and black people and other racial minorities should unite and fight against the whites. That's the core thesis of settlers, and it's garbage, and it's had a horrible effect on the American left. And I am almost positive that the CIA cooked that shit up, and Jay Sakai's not even real. And so, anyways, James Connolly. Man, this is a tough one, guys. This is a tough one. I feel like I can't put him in A, right? Because he wasn't like a hardcore Marxist-Leninist. So I'll put him I mean, I can't put him in S, but I will put him in A above B because I'm Irish. And James Connolly has one of the coolest deaths in socialist history. His death helped inspire the uprising that actually got Ireland their independence after the Easter Uprising, where he was killed, and they tied him to a chair, even though because he couldn't stand up, and then made him face the firing squad in the chair. And he was so beloved, and this was so inspiring, and it was such a horrible example of British brutality, colonial brutality, that it inspired the people to rise up and ultimately gain their independence like as little as a few days later. Their de facto or their de jure independence, not necessarily de facto independence or whatever. I might be getting that mixed up. But either way, he also has this hyper based quote. I haven't been able to find it in like years, but he has some quote that's like, the battle to control politics is a reflection of the battle to control industry, which is so true and such a based quote and so important for Marxists today to think about. The political battle is ultimately a reflection of the economic battle, the battle to control the proletariat. This is why every politician has to pander to the working class constantly, and why they do union busting or pandering and bribing off the unions to try and control the industrial proletariat. So very base quote. Love James Connolly. Heroic man. Eric Honecker. I don't know enough about Honecker to rate him. Maurice Bishop. What was he? He was like some small little country. Was he the New Jewel movement? Was that what it was called? And it was in Grenada. Yeah, he was based. It was a Marxist-Leninist party. Super based, actually. I can't remember how things ended for them. But yeah, shout out to him. We'll rank him. We'll put him in B. I'm being kind of generous here with my rankings. I wonder if I should do this. I wonder if I should move all these guys down to F. And then move Bukharin to E. Move these two to D. Move Rosa to C. And then move like these guys to B. Yeah, I feel like that makes more sense. Hoxha might be A, though. Move him up there. Drop Hoxha. No. No, he's staying in A.